Hey guys, and welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show. I'm your host, Ryan Cartledge, and I'm really excited that you have decided to take time out of your busy schedules to come and hang out today. We're really grateful for you tuning in. And if you have been listening to the podcast for a while, we really appreciate this. Thank you so much. Hopefully you have subscribed so that you never miss an episode. But if not, or if you are new to the show, get yourself over to iTunes, Stitcher, animaltrainingacademy.com, or whatever it is you're listening to this podcast on, and hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss a single episode. We are bringing you today's episode on behalf of the Animal Training Academy, or ATA membership. If you like the conversations in these podcasts, then I want to invite you to continue them with like-minded people within the ATA membership area, which you can find out more about over on the ATA website. Within the membership, you can get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalogue of previous web classes, plus a huge library of videos and projects to problem solve different training situations. And we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group, forums area, and WhatsApp chat groups. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behaviour nerds. But we will get started on today's episode, where we will be talking to one Leslie McDevitt. Leslie is a certified dog behaviour consultant, internationally renowned speaker, and author of 3 books: Control Unleashed, Creating a Focused and Confident Dog, Control Unleashed Puppy Program, and one coming out for this winter US time, Control Unleashed, Reactive to Relaxed. Leslie's writing has been translated into various languages, including Russian, Czech, German, Norwegian, and Swedish. She is on the 2019 Clicker Expo faculty and will also be joining the Fenzi Dog Sport Academy faculty as well. Leslie has 20 years experience using clicker training to build confidence and help companion, working, and performance dogs feel comfortable and happy with challenging environments. She also consults for the University of Pennsylvania's Working Dog Center, where she works with dogs in training to be canine patrol, scent detection, and SAR dogs. Again, helping them learn to process the stimuli in challenging work environments so they can focus on their job. Leslie's first and most influential teacher was Dr. Karen Overall, and she is strongly influenced by her concepts of biofeedback training and her relaxation protocol. In Leslie's work, you can see the confluence of Dr. Overall's relaxation protocol and using clicker training to counter conditioning procedures with an operant base. Leslie says the thing that gets her most excited at the moment is using start button behaviours borrowed from animal husbandry training in order to empower the dogs to direct their own counter conditioning procedures. What does all of that mean? We're going to unpack it all in this podcast episode. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome Leslie to the show today, who is patiently waiting by. Leslie, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute honor to have you. The Animal Training Academy membership is very excited about this episode and from hearing from you. So thank you for taking time out of your day and getting the kids to stay back at school so we have time.
Yes.
Pass your gratitude on to your children as well for allowing us this opportunity.
I will.
Hey, let's dive straight into the first question today, Leslie. Can you just take us back, share with us the early parts of your learning odyssey, where you first, no one can see it, but Leslie's dog is saying, "Hey, Mum, stop talking to that weird screen and look, give me attention."
I've got some herding dogs are in my face right now.
Take us back to where you first learned about positive reinforcement training and share some stories from that time and some of the first animals you started using it with.
Well, I grew up with dogs. That was always a big part of my life. The dogs I grew up with were not trained. They were sweet little pugs that just did their thing. And at some point when I was in high school, my sister and I got a new puppy. And I don't remember why, but my mom decided for that dog we were going to have a trainer. And I have no idea where she found this trainer, if the vet recommended it. We didn't even have the internet yet. So I don't know. But all I know is I was about 16. A woman came to the house, wanted my dog to lie down. My dog had no idea what she was talking about. And she put a leash on my dog and she hung my dog. And I remember feeling like so incredibly helpless and just absolutely shocked. And just going, what the? And so from that day on, I thought all dog trainers were evil. And when I was in graduate school for creative writing, having something to do with what I now do, because I still write, possibly not that creatively. Started to adopt some rescue dogs just to be part of my family. Coming at it with the point of view that I'm going to adopt these, troubled dogs from difficult backgrounds, and I'm going to love them and they will be well behaved because I love them. And that did not work. I was, I wasn't very open to the idea of finding a dog trainer because of what I thought dog trainers did. My vet recommended someone to me who is very skilled and fairly well-known person who taught me a lot, but he was a quote-unquote balanced trainer. And so while I did learn a lot about using positive reinforcement and good timing, I was also learning about using corrections with good timing. And I was not comfortable with that. And I had a very, very fear-aggressive pit and German Shepherd cross trying to walk him in the streets of downtown Philadelphia while he was like actively going at everyone that passed by. As like a 20-something-year-old girl who'd only ever had sweet pugs was traumatic for both of us. Anyway, somehow I heard of Karen overall because she was at Penn at that time, and I had gone to graduate school at Penn. And so I went over there, and I also went to an APDT conference in Houston, and God, that was a long time ago. It was probably like 25 years ago or something. And actually, that's where I first saw cooker training. There was a cooker training video just at like a vendor booth at that conference, and I looked at it and I had this immediate, crazy, visceral response of like, oh, I'm going to spend my life doing that now. And I did. Yeah, I did. I looked at it and just recognized it as this is what's up now. I'm doing this. So I worked with Karen lots and self-taught as far as clicker training and operant conditioning goes. And then, became very involved in dog sports, kept adopting dogs, started, being an instructor and all the other things that happened. So maybe that answered your question. I don't remember what it was anymore.
It was exactly that. Just sharing some stories from that time. And now that's a huge shift to kind of have that visceral moment when your experience, the dog trainers before that had such a punishment-based kind of... it was just like totally out of the blue, to just hang a dog. I mean, it was just insane. And it was one of those things where I was alone. Like my mom was like, here, you go with the puppy to the dog trainer and she'll teach you how to train it. And I was just alone in the room with this stranger that was, torturing my dog. You know what I mean? Like, I was just like, what am I supposed to do? I'm a kid. Like, here's an authority figure. Like, and honestly, like, I don't have a memory of what happened after. My memory is that I'm sitting there watching her do it. That's etched in your memory, eh?
Yeah, definitely.
So before you went to this APDT conference and you went to this booth and you had this moment where you just instantly, like, all of that was, you heard the angels sing, right?
I heard it.
Well, help us understand this. Were you interested in dog training as a possible career at that point, or were you interested in pursuing creative writing, and then just boom, just switched?
I always thought I was going to be a writer. I thought I was going to be a fiction writer. I assumed I was going to get some kind of teaching job while trying to be a fiction writer. And but dogs were always a major part of my life, and I always assumed I'd have lots of them. And yeah, the more that I got interested in working with my reactive dog, the more I started thinking, well, I want to do this. And I actually was thinking about that even while working with the first trainer that I worked with. but not wanting to teach corrections or anything like that and trying to find my way. So yeah, it was kind of there. The seed of it was there, but I didn't have the resources yet to know how I was going to make that happen.
And at the same time, you'd met Dr. Karen overall at the university, and you were starting. She was teaching dog stuff, and you were a student of hers.
Like I said, I was a creative writing student at Penn, having zero to do with the vet department. But Karen, at the time I met her, was the director of behavior at the vet department at VHUP, and so I brought her my one dog. The other dog didn't need that kind of behavior mod, so I had two at the time. I brought her the one that did. And so I was her client, and then, became obsessed with everything. And he did super well. And she allowed me to audit her clinical behavioral medicine courses for the vet students. And so I would sit in these like huge auditorium kind of classrooms with, dark, because she'd be playing video after video of like, oh, this horrible dysfunctional behavior, and the vet students would be like, is this on the exam? And I would be crying. It was like #not a vet student. But yeah, and then I started helping her with her clients' dogs if they needed someone to come and help implement one of her protocols or work on their homework with a helper. I became one of those people for her. And when I had my own training business going, then anytime I felt a dog needed help, I brought them there. And that went on for a lot of years. So I was just incredibly lucky that I happened to have like literally one of the best behavior people in the world right there in my city. Yeah. And I've paid it all back to her now because I've just found her a really, really nice puppy, and she loves puppies. So.
So were there any other #not vet students? In the...
No.
So you must have stuck out to us. You must have seen, there's Leslie, there's that girl Leslie, there's something special in that girl.
You know what? The first client that I had, and this is the first training client, the first, like most people would start with like, obedience or something like that. The first training client I took was like a biting dog that actually bit Karen when I sent him to see her. And it was because I was kind of apprenticing with a dog sports trainer at a club at Y2K9s, which I'm still at 20 years later. And they started just giving me the dogs they didn't want in class. Like from the very beginning, it was control and leash. It just wasn't called anything because it was like, Leslie wants to work with these dogs. No one else does. No one else really knows how. It's not their thing. So I just started with biting dogs. I didn't start with anything first. And my criteria was, I'll take a dog unless it feels worse than my dog. Right. And no one did. No one ever did. So I just took them all. But anyway, that particular client, a little border terrier that I sent to Karen and was sharing that case, I was never, big in the self-esteem department in any sense. But that student came back to me and said, Karen said, what did she say? Something like, Leslie doesn't know how good she is, or something like that. And that that really stuck with me, that she would say that. And I went, oh, what if that were true? What would that maybe look like? Maybe I'm good. So that actually helped quite a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, don't judge me, Leslie, but I watch.
I'm already judging you.
With my wife, we watch a program called X Factor. And Simon Cowell's always sitting there and judging those people on stage. But one thing he often says is he looks at the singer and he goes, you don't know how good you are.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can watch these people, I think, go through the same experience that you kind of just described there. They're like, oh really?
Yeah, because that's like a big thing to say to somebody.
And these people are like bursting into tears and kind of like, right. Oh my God, everyone's told me no my entire life and shot me down, and here I am. And someone saying that to me. So I imagine, yeah, like you said, that must have been huge.
Yeah, that was a big thing, So that was nice. I'm still friends with that client all these years later. Dog. But yeah, that was my my first client, and I felt so badly because he did bite Karen, I believe, multiple times on her leg, because that was, who he was.
And we're going to talk about your books now, but one thing I'm really curious about, because I like to try to think what it's like to look at the world through your eyes. And we get trainers on the show who have come from all different types of backgrounds, business backgrounds, statistical backgrounds, police force, army. With you, it's creative writing. That's kind of where you went to college for. Now, obviously, you're doing that with your books, and you're not writing fiction, but you're writing about dog training.
Yeah.
I'm curious, is there anything else that you take from your creative writing background and you not in the writing phase, but you've brought to dog training that's going to be just unique to you? Does it help you see stuff different?
Okay, no one's ever asked me that question, and it's temporarily shut my brain down while I'm processing it. The answer is yes, but to figure out why the answer is yes would take a while.
Do you look at training like creatively? I mean, we all look at training creatively, but have you got some kind of tools?
And I look at training as a language. And one of the things I was doing, because I wanted to be, believe it or not, a sci-fi fantasy writer, was I was studying parageography, which is the creation of building imaginary worlds, right? Including like maps, languages, culture, rules, all kinds of stuff, and then the stories that happened within that structure. So yeah, and I've studied various languages over my life. I'm good at languages. I'm good at translating and interpreting, and so I think all that has something to do with it. And I also like to think outside the box. So I think that has something to do with it too. And I don't like to be told like something can't be done because it's not done before, or because we do it like this. I'm going to go find out how to do it my way and make it work. Much like the Rebel Alliance would, I suppose.
Did you say much like the Rebel Alliance would?
Yes, I would.
Love it. So I feel like me and the listeners of the show can think about what training being a language might look like. But I don't want to make any assumptions. I want to hear you unpack that a little bit more. When you say you look at training like a language, and I'm gonna say you can't explain this well, Leslie, because now you have to like do an amazing job because you don't like people telling you can't do things.
Exactly. Oh yeah. Let me tell you something.
What does that look like to you?
Also, I want to say that one of my kids has the same exact temperament as me, and thank God I understand how to communicate with him to get him to do things the way that I want to do them. Because if you just tell him, look, I need you to do this now, it's like the pressure of that and just the pushing against that, and I'm going to find my own way. My brain wants to find I'm seeing it differently, and I'm going to find my path. But at least I understand that in him, because I feel like he would drive most ordinary humans crazy. So anyway, what was your question? Was operationalize what I mean by language? Was that your question?
Yeah. What does it mean to you? Like define that for us from Leslie's point of view.
Wow. Could I use the buzzword of relationship to suggest maybe those two things are connected? Like it's about, two beings listening to each other. Something like that. I'm right brain, so I might not give you the best specific answer, Ryan. I'll just tell you the words it's bringing up and what colors they go with. I'm not that bad, but close. So yeah, I think there's levels of that. I think that there's obvious, body awareness and physical communication, and how are you holding your body? How is the dog holding their body? What is that? Dog body language versus human. Like there's an aspect of that that comes naturally to some people and not to others, but thankfully it's something that, can be learned to a large extent. Then there's sort of conditioned language. I'm going to teach you that sit means put your butt down. And then there's kind of mutually agreed upon language, where you could either, the dog does something and you respond. Maybe it's not something conditioned, but he looked out into the backyard and you let him out to go to the bathroom. So then he does it again. So there's kind of mutually agreed upon language where we both go, oh, we've agreed that this symbol now means this has this meaning. And everybody has some level of that with their animal. And then, as I said, there's the conditioned language that has specific taught meanings, and then there's all the other things going on. So somewhere in there might be your answer, Ryan. I don't, perhaps.
The only person that could have answered that question was Leslie McDevitt, and the only way she could have answered it is exactly how you just answered it. So thank you. Thank you very much. I love hearing about what we call here at ATA people's behavior odysseys, and I'm sure there's a lot more that we could dive into, but we're going to talk about control unleashed. Mm-hmm. If I just ask you the question, can you please tell us about that? Can we start there? What is control unleashed for those that haven't heard about it before? Okay. Well, it's a long story, but it's basically the culmination of everything that I think that I've learned so far. And it's fluid, it's flexible, it's not like a finished product. It's highly customized to the individual. So it's not, you have to do everything like this. But anyway, the way that it started out as a class, I didn't name it that. The name was given to me by my friend Julie Jenkins, who was teaching with me at that time and names all the things because she's really good at naming. And I've often wondered, what would I have called it? Because I never even, thought about it. But at the time, I was teaching at the dog sport club. And like I said, I was historically the person that got the interesting dogs. And, people were bringing dogs in to do agility and fly ball. We had frisbee, we had obedience, agility, freestyle, fly ball. And, the dogs that were getting stressed and being, barking at other dogs, running away, doing any behavior that wasn't functionally the one that the people wanted, were my dogs. And, we made a class for them, dogs that couldn't go to the regular class. And I often and still say it, that it's a class about how to be in a class, because it's like, for some people and for some dogs, learning how to be in a class is its own set of skills, apart from learning the skills they teach you in a class. So if you're a green handler or someone without a lot of confidence, or if you have a dog with some kind of anxiety or worry about being near other dogs or the noise in the building or whatever it is, and then you have a teacher that's focused on, here's these very specific set of agility handling skills. I need you to stand like this, put your arm like this, look over here, and you're trying to learn that while you're trying to just process that you're even there and you're in charge of an animal that's doing the same. It's so much. And so part of the original purpose of the class was let's just practice, or, what are the things you're going to see in a sport environment that your dog is not used to seeing? Let's teach them that, it's normal to see those things. How are you going to walk past, a crate full of possibly barking dogs because they want to get out and work? How do you walk past dogs tugging or, doing equipment? How do you walk into the door into what could be a chaos or whatever, And so it was really just kind of practicing so that people and the dogs didn't have to think about how to navigate that. And then they could actually just work on the skill. So there was a lot of that going on. Also, and I think this is something that everybody that trains dogs needs to keep working on, myself included. We all need to take it very, very seriously, that some dogs need a referral to a veterinary behaviorist, and we need to continue working on knowing which dogs that is, when it's appropriate to add that resource to your team. Because, I often get a dog that, is at a clinical level of whatever is causing, less than functional behavior. When people have gone through all these different training classes and all these different methods, it's been torture for everybody. It's not working well, because the dog needs something
needs something else before, conventional methods can work. So, or, conventional training methods can work. And so that's also been part of it from the beginning is, recognizing which dogs feel clinical, helping, people see that, kind of matchmaking, finding behaviorists, finding all that stuff. That's been part of it too. And obviously, another part of it is some dogs aren't meant to be in those environments. So some dogs will learn to operate in those environments and be great. And it's actually very enriching for them. I've worked with, about a bazillion border collies that now can, really happily function in high stress work environments, and they wouldn't have it any other way. But first they had to learn about other dogs might move fast past you and what are you going to do and all kinds of stuff. And then there's other dogs that, just because you want to do an activity doesn't mean your dog has to do it. Sorry. And that's hard for a lot of people to hear. They put a lot of time and effort and hopes and dreams into this animal. They don't want to be told, sorry. And I know how it feels. I've been in that same place myself. And it, no one wants to hear it. But so figuring out what dogs are appropriate for what intervention and so that's part of it too. Figuring out who needs what thing. But controlled and leash, basically, and this is how Ken Ramirez, I heard him describe it as counter conditioning with an operant base. That is now how I describe it because that's exactly what it is. Actually, he described one game within it as that, which is the look at that game. But really all of control and leash is about that because that's what I like to do. I like to work on a dog's, emotional state. And I like to give a dog some autonomy and some control over training. And so that's the operant part. So it started out as a class, and then I started writing some articles about stuff I was doing in the class for Clean Run. That's how that happened. People liked the articles because at that time, now it's a thing, but at that time, talking about stress and arousal and sport dogs and stuff like that, it wasn't a thing yet. And that's a big reason that the book kind of exploded when it came out, because there wasn't a book for that yet. And there were so many people trying to work through those issues. So I started writing articles about it, and then, the books thing happened. And I started out at a sport club focused on, performance dogs and wanting them to have functional performance behaviors. And at this point, I'm really more interested in just making things voluntary so dogs can be, in control of feeling good, in control of, everything, in control of regulating themselves and learning how to feel good so they can operate in the world. It doesn't have to be in a dog sport world, just the world. So anyway, next question.
So you got these people coming to your classes, and they obviously want their dogs to be successful in this space. Their dog might be saying something else. They might be thinking, just because I love it, it will be fine. But then realizing that it's not. So it's kind of like, going back to our earlier conversations, the dog and the owner are going to a class, but they're speaking different languages.
Right.
And so your job is, the Control Unleashed's intention is to get them aligned with the languages they're talking to each other.
Yeah, I like that. Alignment is good. Mm-hmm.
And you said right at the start of explaining Control Unleashed that it's fluid, it's flexible, it's highly customized to the individual, and so we mentioned this in your bio book that you're planning to release shortly in the next 12 months. That's part of this process, and that's important to you, obviously, is to kind of continually to tweak, refine, and build upon what you've come up with so far. So that's what we have to look forward to in the next book, is everything you've learned from that first publication to.
Yeah, I mean, there's some things that I've added to or modified because I've had 11 years, I think, to think about it and continue teaching it. And then there's some new stuff that I put in there. So yeah, it's very much where my head's at right now. And it's a mix, so yeah, that's what it is. Where Leslie's head is at right now.
And so you said Ken Ramirez described it as counter conditioning with operant base.
Yes, he did.
Can you unpack what that means for the listeners of this audience who might be getting their neurons in a twist? What does it mean to you?
Okay. So, if you're doing like classical counter conditioning and desensitization, you're making things happen. And if you're doing operant conditioning, the dog is making things happen, right? The dog is using his behavior as a tool to control an outcome, right? And so it makes sense to me to let those things all get mixed up together. And I think some people like to split them into parts, but of course we all know the whole Pavlov is on your shoulder thing. So I tend to kind of let counter conditioning and desensitization happen while the dog is telling me how close, how far, does he want to be near this thing? Does he not? In a language that we've agreed upon, that we'll both understand. So, and I find that just works a lot faster. So sometimes, like in social media, I'll read like, counter conditioning takes forever, or, I do this instead of that because it takes so long and this and that. And I'm always like, it takes like a minute. But I just have a certain style of doing it and it goes quickly. I just kind of let those things organically happen. But anyway, so I think what Ken was saying was it's operant style training, but it's counter conditioning at the same time. And so it's a blend of behavior mod and clicker training, that's where my brain lives, right? So it made total sense that he would call it that. I was like, oh, that's what it is, because I came from a behavior modification model from Karen, which was not clicker training. It was biofeedback based. Teach the dog's behaviors that are physiologically linked to having a relaxed response to scary things. Teach them to take a deep breath, which I still don't understand why everyone in the world isn't doing all the time, but they're not. And, and then I looked at the clicker training aspect. And what I love the most about it is that the dog can use their behaviors to, like I said, control outcomes, make things happen, communicate with people. So put it together. I liked how he described it. Wait, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I'll turn my microphone on. That'll help.
That was scary for a second.
A blend of behavior modification and clicker training is where Leslie McDevitt's brain lives. If you want to visit Leslie McDevitt's brain, then you go into that space. That's the blend between behavior modification and clicker training.
Yeah.
And you also said to me that, and this is pre-recording, that voluntary behavior is super important to you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you help explain why? And for those who might be listening and might not be exactly clear on what you mean when you say that, help define that for the audience as well.
Okay, so what I mean by voluntary, or some people say start button behavior, is that the dog initiates, not the person, right? The dog is like, I'm ready to train now. The dog initiates and then they consent. I'm ready to train. I do want to do that. Let's keep going. So they're getting some control over their training procedure. And it's been most widely used in the areas of animal husbandry and veterinary medicine, in zoo and marine animal populations where, really highly skilled exotic animal trainers, have got hyenas and dolphins and giraffes. Like, here, I'm ready for my blood draw, and I'm like, why aren't regular people with dogs do it? If you can do it with a dolphin, I think you can do it with your dog. So anyway, I have a few, friends that are really out there teaching this stuff. Laura Monaco Torelli and also Deb Jones, and I love it. But since my brain lives at the intersection of behavior mod and clicker training, when I look at that stuff, I go, and why aren't we all using it so dogs can be in charge of counter conditioning with an upper base? And so when I started looking at the husbandry behaviors in that context and having these thoughts, I went back over, all my original stuff, and I looked at what are all the ways that dogs were volunteering for control and leash training. And there's a lot of ways. It's built in, but there aren't a lot of specific specific, like it's a very sort of organic program where, you put, if you don't treat in position, you put a treat on the ground and the dog can eat it and then go back to position to say, keep going. And so it's, a lot of stuff like that goes on in Control and Leash. That's a very sort of organic, fluid, back and forth kind of program. But after watching the husbandry stuff, I thought it would also be really cool if dogs literally could just like do a targeting behavior to say, walk that dog closer to me, and now stop, and be super literal. And also it means I wouldn't have to be handling the dog. The dog could remotely tell me what to do and I could be handling the helper dog, so I need less people now. If the dog can remotely, put his head on a target or something, and I don't have to be next to him or whatever. So that's one cool thing about it. And it's just another nice thing to add to what was already working. So why not have another thing? So in Control and Leash training, mats were always important. The concepts of stationing and target training were always super important. Teaching a conditioned relaxed response on a mat. And so I love the chin rest behavior that I lifted from animal husbandry. I mean, people were using it in other kinds of training too, but this is, where I got it from and got interested in it. Because it's another stationing behavior. And those are always awesome to have. Might as well have more than one. So I don't remember what your question was at all. It had something to do with what's voluntary training. So we're talking about dogs using either a conditioned behavior or one that the dog is doing that you've captured or shaped. That is some kind of, yes, let's start this procedure. And then if they stop doing that behavior, that's a no, I need a break. For a practical example, I'm supposed to be making a video for Clicker Expo advertising. And so this morning, I wanted to teach Ever, my young Border Collie, to tell me to tug with my puppy. I have a Tervuren puppy. And so I had a climb, a little platform outside. And so if she went over to and offered to sit, I would tug with the puppy and then give her a treat. Treat her out of position on the ground, so she had to get off the climb to eat it, and then she got back on the climb and offered to sit. I'd tug with the puppy again, and so so she's telling me when to do that. Stuff like that is really fun. Like I said, it makes counter conditioning go faster. She's a rescue dog that's a little bit resource guardy, and so giving her the control to say when to give a resource to the other dogs has been very helpful. Like she'll tell me when to give my other Border Collie treats. She was able to generalize to, immediately to telling me to give the puppy his toy. And all the pieces of, needing to be desensitized to seeing another dog tugging, seeing, the new dog tug with her mommy, her toy, etc. Plus like the motion sensitivity that she has and like the strong eye that she has. We might have had to make that into all different kinds of little steps to work on and a tiny bit at a time. But the fact that she could tell me to turn it on or off, I didn't have to do any of those other things. She was like, I'm going to sit on this climb now. Go ahead, tug. So it's just fun. It's a fun thing that I'm playing with right now.
And before the podcast, we said we're going to steal something from Teresa McEwen and get you passion talking. And you said a few times that you've forgotten what the question was, which means for me that potentially it might not, that we're achieving that task because you've gone off on your passion talking and you're getting what the question was. Now, you said there that this stuff is just another nice thing to add what's already working. Why not have another thing? And is this kind of like, I'm trying to use some metaphors here and keep a theme going in this episode. Is this like adding another layer to your language? Is this like building your syntax and your sentences?
I think it's more just like adding more words to it, because the layer of the dog, asking to keep going and stuff like that is already in there. A main example of that for Control and Leash is called the Give Me a Break game, which the pattern games kind of were born out of, and the idea that the dog is the one asking for work, using their own behavior to ask you to train them. So I think it's more like just adding more words. And I think also, especially when you're dealing with, strong emotions in an animal, regardless of species, I forget my train of thought now. Yeah. What was I going to say, Brian? I don't know.
It's like adding more words, and something that came out of your Give Me a Break game.
I know what it is. I feel like if you have a behavioral, thing that needs to be discussed and addressed, I feel like the more different ways you can address one thing, the more neurons fire, the more different ways your brain has to process something, the better. So you can do more than one game to work on the same thing. So in that sense, that makes more sense to me too. Just here, now we're going to work on it like this, So for the CU dogs that have already learned, like, you can breathe and relax on the mat and see things and turn away from the things and do these things to give them. And now you can also say when it starts, you could say when it stops. They never pretty much ever do stop something because when I'm working with a dog, they're very under their threshold level, they're comfortable, and they're already trusting a system. But I imagine if you didn't have the things that I just said in place, at some point the dog will want to stop, and then they have an easy way to do that. What I do is I'll place the treat out of position so the dog has a lot of chances to put himself back, to continue, in lieu of the dog moving out of position on his own.
So it's kind of like adding more words to the sentence. So more is being said in the conversation between you and the dog, and then potentially also adding more words to your vocabulary that you have with your dog, so your dictionary gets bigger and you have more ways of communicating. Right.
And here's a very spooky, since Halloween is tomorrow. A very spooky example of generalizing. My puppy, I said 5 months old, Serviran. He one of the first things I taught him was a chin rest, and he just generalized it onto like every object. And whereas my other dogs have a sort of an automatic, sit if they want to communicate with me, want feedback, want a resource, they go to that first. He looks for something to put his head on. And so my border collie had a tennis ball that he wanted, and she was sitting on the couch squeaking it, and I watched him. Sometimes if I'm sitting on the couch eating a snack, or my kids are, he goes and he puts his chin on the couch cushion. And that gets, occasionally intermittently reinforced. I watched him go over to the couch cushion and put his chin down. And then my other dog gave him the ball. And I was like, I'm done. They're just training each other now. What's really cool is that, because I said I've done some work with Everett with her resource guarding, and I was talking about how she learned to tell me to give my older border collie a treat with a chin rest. And next step I was doing for her was teach her to throw him the ball, so that if she picked up a ball, instead of keeping it from him, she's kind of tossing it at him, and then I play with him, and then I give it back to her. And so I kind of watched them both generalize two things out of context, because she kind of threw the ball at my puppy, and my puppy asked for the ball with his chin rest. So they were both using conditioned behaviors out of context on each other. So that was nice.
So then you're taking the language, and your dogs are taking the language that you're intentionally teaching them and using it with each other.
It was spooky, like two gorillas signing to each other.
Yeah, that's super cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, and of course, I didn't have a camera or anything, but I have a feeling it'll happen again. So,
I can't wait to see that.
Yeah.
And so you said the Give Me a Break game. What's the Give Me a Break game?
There's different versions of it and how you can use it, but originally I developed it with my I had a little terrier mix who was very pressure sensitive, shut down if you even thought you might want him to do something. So that's what I mean by pressure, that you even want to train him at all. And that you're just thinking that, not even looking directly at him. That was too much pressure. So my friend had just gone to one of Kathy Steo's workshops and had come back with like all these amazing things to practice, and a lot of them had to do with like timing and rate of reinforcement. And like we were like recording each other doing all the things, and while I was doing that with him, and there were breaks in it. You know what? And I don't remember the whole story, but there were like timed breaks within this. And what I saw while I was doing that was that he was using behavior to get me to keep going instead of taking his full timed break. And I said, I really like that. I want to make that into its own whole thing. And so I started just putting. So the first behavior that I use this procedure with is just like attention, just some kind of the dog contacting you before I add other behavior into it. So what I do is like just have a space that's reasonable, have an environment that's limited and reasonable. So you're not in the middle of a field or something doing it with a dog that loves to sniff. You start within like if you're in the field, have a little box of ring gates around so they can't go too far. I don't want them to be on a leash, although you could have them on a very, very long line. But ideally I'd have, a small environment and a loose dog. And then I would just get a treat and put it in one corner of the little, gated or, managed area. And then often I have a chair so that people can just turn around and go right to the chair and sit down. So the people are being station trained. There's something real specific to do. They don't have to like wonder about what to be doing. And the dog learns that after he eats the treat, he looks up, you're not there. He turns around and looks for you, goes back to the chair. That causes you to get up and put another treat down somewhere else. And so every time the dog thinks about you and comes towards you to the chair to make contact, that behavior causes you to get up and place another treat down so that he can do it again. And then, you can expand your conditions. You can open the gates. You can add something distracting inside or outside the gates. So for dogs that have to learn, sometimes judges happen. Sometimes agility beams judges will walk by and stare at you. And, so what? So I'll do things like I'll walk around the ring while the handler is putting a treat down and walking back to the chair, and the dog kind of has to walk past me to get to the chair. So they kind of notice things, but they have a plan. They're like hell-bent on getting back to that chair. So you can add things, you can play with it. And you can also, then you can start adding behaviors. So for example, dogs that run away on an agility course we won't get into the million reasons why that might be happening. But if you just look at it practically, the dog can ask you to tell them to do agility, and then they actually don't run away. It's kind of amazing. So you would add a behavior. You could have one jump in your little managed space. So the dog comes up to your chair, you give the jump cue, put the treat down on the ground, leave, go back to the chair. And you can keep adding obstacles. So the dog returns to your chair. Oh, you wanted another, obstacle, jump, now go in the tunnel, put the treat down, return to your chair. So even dogs with a very long history of they do a couple obstacles and then it's too much and they run away, and it's like this whole long habitual history between the handler and the dog. They'll do a whole sequence, without even thinking about it, because they're just thinking about go back to the chair, and then you just add another thing. And so that's an example of the Give Me a Break game, and it was originally meant to build motivation, to be trained and take the pressure off the dog. Cause that's where my brain was then. That's the kind of thing I was thinking more about, coming at it from a sport trainer angle. And now looking back on it, I'm looking at it more as a person interested in using voluntary behaviors. At the end of the day though, it's the same. I'm just looking at it a little bit differently now. So that's the Give Me a Break game. And because it does turn into a pattern, you put a treat down and walk away, and the dog comes and gets you, and back and forth and back and forth. When I started thinking later about patterns, I was like, oh, there's the first one. The other patterns kind of came out of that understanding that the dog can direct something predictable and with, a rhythm to it and back and forth. So it's actually kind of the original pattern game.
I want to talk more about pattern games now. So from that, you just said it then, it was the original pattern game. So kind of patterns involved around this. And I want to try and pull out what you said there. And are patterns about just predictability for the dog? You go do this and then this thing happens. Like how do you define patterns? What does that mean to you? And why specifically this concept of patterns? Why is it good for the dog? I mean, you probably potentially just answered that, but maybe build on it.
For one thing, a phrase I learned early on from Karen overall was rule structure. And by rule structure, she didn't mean like these are the rules. She meant the dog has kind of hello cat. The dog has sort of a safe space where things are predictable. He knows what the rules are within this structure. Okay. And then if something happens sort of that deviates from that structure, at least he has something he can go back to, rather than just being kind of unanchored in a storm, as it were. Okay. So that idea of rule structure just made immediate sense to me. And, it's part of what the protocol for relaxation is about, creating kind of a set of rules that the dog can rely on. So there's something happens outside that set of rules, you can say to the dog, that happened, but but this still works. We're still operating within the set of rules. And it allows the dog to kind of process things from a place where they feel safe. And so taking that idea into account, the pattern games are about creating a rule structure that includes movement. So like in a relaxation protocol, the dog is not moving, you are. So the pattern games are kind of a mix of this give me a break idea where the dog is asking for work, asking for more, choosing that pressure of interaction, and kind of the relaxation protocol in the sense that it's a set of rules that's predictable. The dog knows what's going to happen next. And then you put the voluntary piece in there where the dog is saying, let's do this again. I know these 3 or 4 things are going to happen and I'm willing to do it again. So what happens when the dog has a set of rules is, again, if something happens outside of that set of rules, you can kind of help the dog plug it in. Yep, that happened and we're still doing this. So one really easy, the first one I teach people, it's so simple. The dog doesn't have to have any background. The person doesn't have to have any background except to count to 3. You count to 3. At 3, you have a treat available for the dog. So the dog is learning at 3, there's a treat available. If he doesn't want to eat it, that's fine. But this is what happens when you hear 3. And then the person starts to move while they're counting to 3. So with the third step now, there's a treat, and the dog starts kind of following the person and kind of counting along with them. And so then at an appropriate distance, you can add in something that's going to call the dog's attention. And the dog may notice it, but then, but the person is now at 3. The dog's becoming conditioned to kind of keep an ear on the person, and at 3, look for his treat. And it's a way for the dog to be able to plug in, and something's happening in the environment while we're doing this thing that I know what's happening next, etc. And then if you wanted to make that more voluntary, you put the treat on the ground, the dog eats it, looks up at you, and that causes you to take the next step. So if you were doing it that way, the dog could tell you walk me towards something or not, because he knows you're going to take a step in a direction once he looks back up at you. So you could do it either way. But so a practical example is working with a dog at the working dog center, who was like barking at, civilians when he was very young and starting his patrol training. And so we did a lot of the 1, 2, 3 thing with him. And it got connected to the look at that game, which is about seeing something and kind of reporting it to the handler. So, she'd be like 1, and a guy would ride by on a bike or something like that, and he'd see it and look back at her, and she'd be like, yeah, I see it too. 2, 3. So you just acknowledge and keep going. The counting is becoming a part of the reinforcement process. And so that dog, that's a structure, a real simple one that anyone can do. Without that structure, the dog would just be getting out of the van, vigilant, looking for someone on a bike to bark at, right? But if he's getting out of the van, 1, 2, he's already doing something that he's learned that you're doing this, something else might happen outside of it. You can kind of plug it in and keep going. So even if it's that simple, he can walk around all around downtown and do that. And then, once they trust the structure, then you can lift the structure. In other words, you don't have to do that forever once they have the experience with it, but it's there if you need it. You can always go back to it if some crazy thing happens. And you can use it in a new place, the parking lot of the vet office or at a dog show, or, you can use it as needed. But anyway, that's the simplest, easiest one. But they're all fairly simple because the point isn't what the pattern is. We're not trying to teach the dog something with the pattern. We're trying to make the dog feel like there's something safe that he understands with the pattern. And so it doesn't really matter what the pattern is, and your dog might make up his own. What matters is that it feels like a pattern to the dog. And you'll know if things are falling apart because it will stop having that rhythm. And then you're going to have to reevaluate what you're doing, what's happening in the environment, what's happening in the dog, Yeah. Does that make sense? Because I think it's easier to see a pattern than just discuss it. But hopefully it makes sense.
Well, how about I try to say everything you just said to me back to you in a nutshell.
Backwards. Say it all back.
Then we'll be speaking a different language. So it's basically about even with things going on, the dogs know that the rules are still on.
Right.
And then you add that voluntary piece of information in there as well. And the whole point of it is to make the dog feel safe with something it understands.
Mm-hmm. And then that enables him. Really, that enables him to kind of like plug in an outside stimulus that he might not be sure about. Yes, that's just another thing you see while you're doing this other thing, that's what a rule structure is for.
Especially the barking pass.
And some of the games are you could do while moving, and some you could do if you're kind of stuck somewhere and you have to just be seated and you don't have a lot of space. So there's kind of, games for patterns for different reasons, different practical reasons why you want one over the other. But here's another example of a practical place to use them. My friend that works at a busy city shelter, and again, like the dogs don't have necessarily a prior training history, neither do the volunteers, but everyone can count to 3. You know what I mean? And so it just kind of gives an order that is, it's calming. Everyone's kind of expecting the same thing, so.
Just like a dog showing up somewhere and going, oh, hey, that person talk. It's like you go into a foreign country. So maybe the dog goes to like a new vet office or something where someone knows the patterns of that dog.
Exactly.
You might go to like South America and you're like, oh my God, there's someone that speaks English. I need their help. The dog's like, oh my God, that person speaks my language.
Yeah, exactly. And it's easy, to pick it up.
And I know when I've been in that situation in foreign countries, that's immediately made me feel safe.
Yeah, right. Someone like understands what your needs are. Like you can communicate what your needs are to somebody.
Yeah, that's super cool. How many patterns have you created? Do you know?
I think I have a DVD of them from Tawser Dog, if you know Tawser, and I feel like there's like maybe 6 or 7 on there. Some are about stations, and you can combine them. So you could like do a sort of a 1, 2, 3 walking from a mat to a mat to a mat, So I like to kind of split space up. So a dog that's anxious or like hypervigilant, looking for something to worry about or react to, if they enter a big training space or something like that, I like to split the space up between stations. And then the dog has kind of a rhythm, a pattern to follow from station to station. And then you get to the station, you relax on the station, you go to the next thing. So the dog doesn't just go in and feel like, oh my God, what's going to happen to me in here? And so they can get used to kind of moving around a space like that. And then again, if something happens, another dog enters the room or whatever, they can notice it. But they're doing their thing and they know how they're getting around the room. So anxiety is about being uncertain about what's going to happen next. And so this kind of just takes that away, so they can process seeing a stimulus that otherwise would trigger a response, because they do know what's going to happen next. It's easier for them to kind of take it in then.
And then they feel more control, and we are unleashing that control onto them.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned towards the dog there. I know you've got to pick your kids up in about 25 minutes, so we'll head towards the end. But you mentioned towards the dog there, like I just said. Can you give some information to the listeners of this show that want to build on our conversation thus far? Where can they go to learn more about this, learn more about you, and learn more?
So the sad truth is that I have not updated my website since 2007 when it was created. But maybe one day I will. That would be nice. I have the 3 books. I also have 3 DVDs. I have the Pattern Games one that I mentioned. I have 2 that are companions to the books that Clean Run puts out. A foundation seminar one that's kind of, because Control Unleashed has kind of a set of foundational behaviors that then you can use for the, what I call games, but for the counter conditioning procedures. So there's like a foundation CD, DVD, and a games one. I'm on Facebook a lot, but not other social media. But that's a place you can join me. I have like a, Control Unleashed Facebook page, and sometimes I even teach a class on there, like a Facebook group. I'm also doing a instructor certification program right now. So if any of your listeners already know this stuff and are already training and would like to, be a certified CU instructor, that's something else I'm doing right now. As the new book comes out, to make sure people teaching CU classes are like up to date if they want a certification. So I'm out there, but I need to do something about my website.
It's a good problem to have, to be out there and needing to do something with your website than not being out there and needing to do something with your website.
A fabulous website and not being out there.
So where's the best place to buy this stuff? Is it?
You could go right to Clean Run. You could, you can kind of go anywhere. You can go to Amazon. You could, in different countries, there's like different, like in the UK and different places, there's different, country specific vendors that have this stuff, that where the postage might be different and, stuff like that. In the UK, David Hobson, Positive Animal Solutions has the stuff. For example, and that might be easier to order like from New Zealand or,
Nothing's easy to order from New Zealand.
Clean Run also, I think, has ebooks, and they also have like these little, you can like rent a snip of one of the DVDs. Like you want to watch a specific thing, you just rent the video on demand, it's called. So I usually just kind of refer people to Clean Run since they publish the books and stuff.
All right, cool. And we'll link to all of the stuff in the podcast right up, and I'll make sure, Leslie, that I have that all correct. One last question.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. What were we going to say?
I was going to say, I do occasionally put stuff on YouTube, but it's badly shot video on my phone of whatever I'm thinking about at the moment.
I love that. That's completely changing the subject to where social media is at in 2018. I think my interpretation, which could be completely wrong, is that's the most valuable stuff. We don't want to see all that polished stuff anymore. We want to see you being you.
That's what I think. That's what you're going to get anyway. I'm basically just that. I don't really have like a polished side. So.
Well, what my thinking is, people relate to that, who's polished, who goes around life like polished, like this is how I live my life, everything's always perfect. It's not true. Yep. Hey, one last question before we wrap up, Leslie. Really keen to hear your answer to this one. It's something that I ask all podcast guests, and that is, we started with what's that?
I said vanilla. I'm just joking.
Vanilla. Cool. And that is the end of the podcast show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. We started off with learning about where your journey began, and you brought us up to speed of everything you're doing now. For this last bit, I'd just like to ask you, please, to take us into the future. We know where your brain is parked in 2018, but 5-10 years from now, Where do you see everything going that you're doing, that we're doing as a community with dog training, with exotic animal training, with all of the things? Where do you see all of us going in 5 to 10 years?
I'm really seeing, at least like in the clicker and in the ABA communities, that people are really on the same track. Whether it's performance dog training, husbandry, clicker people, I really feel like we're all on this really cool, interesting path where people are evaluating the concept of, voluntary behaviors and consent more. And the technology just keeps getting better and trainers keep getting trainier. And I don't have high hopes for the rest of the world, but I have high hopes for our community's future and what we're going to be doing. So that's my one positive feeling right now.
Trainers keep getting trainier. I like that a lot. Yeah. Get more trainier. Hey, thank you for that, Leslie, and thank you so much for sharing everything today. Really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us here at Animal Training Academy, have this conversation, catch up a few weeks ago when we called up to talk about this episode, shoot emails back and forth, battle the technology to get everything set up today, and all of the things. We appreciate all the time and attention you've given to us and everything you do. Thank you so much, Leslie.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. Thanks for including me in your fun tribe. I appreciate it.
It's an absolute honor to have you here. I want to visit the junction of, what was it, behavior modification and clicker training. And do you have any like USB plugs there that you can like just plug in, download your brain?
In a few years, and probably I will.
But we, of course, appreciate all of you out there in the world tuning in to this today as well. And if you've enjoyed this episode and you are interested in carrying on this conversation about working with animals, dogs, in the most positive, funnish, choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of the episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.animaltrainingacademy.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as a Netflix social media platform for behavior geeks. There is something there for absolutely everyone, and we're looking forward to having you join the tribe. That is it for this episode, though. We're going to wrap it up there. Thanks again so much, everyone, for listening. You will hear from us again soon.